I've spent 15 years training my ears to catch what doesn't belong, a frequency that sits a half step off, a resonance that hums where it shouldn't. I do it professionally. I do it automatically. I do it in my sleep. So when I walked into my own living room 2 days before my flight to Oslo and noticed something that had no business being there, something small, something most husbands would walk right past without blinking, I didn't tell myself I was imagining it. I told myself to start paying very close attention. Because in my experience, the things that don't belong rarely arrive alone. It was a coffee mug, not ours. I knew every mug in that kitchen the way I knew every acoustic panel in every venue I'd ever assessed. Petra and I had 12. I could tell you the shelf position of each one without looking. This one was sitting on the drying rack like it lived there. Dark navy, no handle chip, no logo, completely unremarkable, except I had never seen it before in my life. I picked it up, turned it over, set it back down. Petra was in the studio space she'd converted from our second sitting room, on a call with someone from the foundation. I could hear her voice through the wall, warm, professional, the specific register she used when she wanted someone to feel like the most important person in the room. I knew that register well. She'd used it on me once too. I didn't ask her about the mug. Not yet. Instead, I stood there in my own kitchen, holding a cup of coffee I'd just made in my own house, staring at a mug that belonged to someone whose name I didn't know yet, and I felt the very specific sensation I feel right before I identify a problem frequency in a concert hall. Not alarm, not panic, just that clean, quiet click of recognition. Something is off. Find it. Before I take you back to how all of this started, tell me the time and where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Consider liking and subscribing, but only if this one earns it. Now let me walk you back a bit. Petra and I had been together 9 years, married for 6. We'd built something that looked genuinely good from every angle most people bother to check. She ran curatorial programming for the Aldwych Foundation, contemporary art, emerging artists, the kind of work that made people feel cultured for standing near it. I traveled for contracts, came home between projects, and we'd learned to make the distance work in the way couples do when they're both honest about needing space to function. The move to Portland 3 years earlier had been mutual and easy. Her foundation offered her the roll deck. I could work from anywhere with a good airport connection. We found a house in the northeast part of the city. Older construction, high ceilings, the kind of bones that make a building feel like it has something to say. I loved it immediately. For most of those 3 years, everything felt level, calibrated, like a room that had been acoustically treated just right. No flutter echo, no dead spots, nothing bouncing back wrong. Then, about 4 months before Oslo, something shifted. Not dramatically, not obviously, just slightly off frequency. Petra started keeping different hours, not late enough to demand explanation, just late enough to notice. She'd come home from foundation events quieter than usual, then overcompensate with conversation that felt assembled rather than natural. She started going to gallery openings I wasn't invited to, which wasn't unusual by itself, except she used to ask me anyway, knowing I'd probably decline, because the asking had always been the point. She stopped asking. And then there was Soren. Soren Vale had been my friend first. We'd met at a sound installation event 6 years ago. He was the architect who had designed the space. I was the consultant who told him his east wall was killing the mid-range. He laughed, bought me a drink, and somewhere in that conversation we'd become the kind of friends who show up for each other without needing a reason. He was sharp, generous with his time, and one of those rare people who listened as well as he talked. He and Petra had always gotten along. I'd always considered that a good thing. Standing in my kitchen, staring at a navy mug that didn't belong on my drying rack, I wasn't thinking about Soren yet, but I would be, very soon. The thing about being professionally trained to assess structures is that you start doing it to everything. Buildings, acoustics, conversations, marriages. You develop an instinct for load-bearing elements, the things that, if removed, would change the shape of everything around them. And once you start looking at your own life that way, you can't really stop. The night after I found the mug, Petra made dinner. She cooked the way she always cooked when she was in a good mood, unhurried with music on, tasting things twice before deciding they were ready. She asked about Oslo, whether I'd confirmed the venue contacts, whether I'd remembered to pack my reference monitors this time. I had, I said. Last time I'd left them in a storage locker in Toronto for 3 weeks, which she still found unreasonably funny. I laughed with her. I set the table.
I poured the wine, and the entire time I was quietly mapping the last 4 months in my head like a floor plan I'd been handed without a legend. She'd been distracted around November. I'd noticed it then, but filed it under work pressure. The foundation was launching a new acquisition cycle, and Petra carried those periods like weather. By December, she'd leveled out, or so I'd thought. But leveling out and actually being level are two different things, and I was only now understanding the difference. There were gallery openings on Thursday nights she mentioned only in passing, a new colleague she referenced once and then never again, a weekend in late December when I'd been in Tucson for a pre-assessment and she'd told me she spent both days at the Foundation archive. When I came home Sunday night, she'd seemed relaxed in a way that didn't quite match 2 days of archival cataloging. I hadn't questioned any of it, because each piece on its own weighed almost nothing. That's the architecture of normal. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps adding rooms until you realize one day that you're living in a house you didn't design and can't quite find your way out of. The mug was still on the drying rack the next morning. I checked. Petra left early for the foundation. I stood in the kitchen with my coffee, my mug, the one with the small chip near the base from the time I dropped it in a hotel bathroom in Vancouver, and I looked at the navy one and decided to do something I'd never done in 6 years of marriage. I went through her things. Not frantically, not guiltily, methodically, the way I'd sweep a room for acoustic anomalies before a client arrived. Her studio space first. The desk was tidy in the specific way Petra kept things tidy, organized by invisible logic that only she could navigate. I didn't disturb the arrangement. I just looked. A Foundation Gala program from January with handwritten notes on the margin, a printed email thread about an artist residency, a small stack of exhibition proposals, and underneath those proposals, half hidden by its own ordinariness, a printed restaurant receipt. Dinner for 2, a place in the Pearl District I'd never been to. Date, a Thursday in January when Petra had texted me she was eating at her desk. I folded it once and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I straightened everything exactly as I'd found it and went to finish packing for Oslo. I was leaving in 27 hours. The question sitting in my chest wasn't whether something was wrong. I was past that. The question was whether I was going to get on that plane without understanding what I was leaving behind and who I was leaving it with. I thought about the mug again. Dark navy, no chip, no logo, no explanation. Soren's favorite color was navy. I remembered that suddenly for no good reason. He'd had it as an accent wall in his studio for years. I'd always given him grief about it. He'd always told me I had no visual imagination. I told myself it was a coincidence, and almost believed it. Almost.
I've assessed concert halls in 11 countries. I know how to be professionally present while personally somewhere else entirely. It's a skill you develop when your work requires total environmental focus, but your brain has other ideas. You learn to split yourself cleanly, one half reading the room, one half running something else quietly in the background. On the flight to Oslo, I ran Petra, not obsessively, not with the kind of spiral energy that makes a person useless, just steadily, the way you monitor a frequency you're not sure about yet, watching it, measuring it, not reacting until you have enough data to be sure. I'd kissed her goodbye at the door the morning I left. She'd held on a second longer than usual, which I'd noticed without knowing what to do with. She said she'd miss me. She said 3 weeks felt too long. She said to text her when I landed, and to please not forget to eat real food this time instead of whatever I called food in airport terminals. I said I would. I meant it. I texted her from the gate. She responded with a photo of the coffee she just made, her mug, the white ceramic one with the small painted bird on the side that she'd bought at a market in Lisbon on our 5th anniversary trip. Her mug, not the navy one. I stared at that photo for longer than made sense. By the time I landed in Oslo and cleared customs, I had approximately 4 hours of non-consecutive sleep and the very specific mental state that comes from being exhausted but too alert to actually rest. The kind of tired that makes everything feel slightly too sharp. The venue contact, a man named Brandt, met me at arrivals with a thermos of coffee and the energy of someone who'd been awake since 4. I liked him immediately. The venue was a converted shipyard on the western waterfront. Extraordinary bones, massive industrial ceiling height, raw concrete and reclaimed timber, the kind of space that had acoustic personality before anyone touched it. Under different circumstances, I would have been genuinely excited. I was still genuinely excited. I just had a receipt in my jacket pocket.
a navy mug in my memory, and a marriage I couldn't stop listening to from the wrong side of an ocean. The first 3 days I kept to the work. Brant and his team were thorough and prepared, and the assessment required real attention, mapping reflection patterns, identifying problem zones, running frequency sweeps across different positions in the room. I was good at this. I let myself be good at it. Then on the 4th night, Petra called. It was late her time, past 11 in Portland. She sounded warm and slightly tired, the way she sounded after a long foundation event. She told me about a new artist the acquisitions committee had approved, someone whose work she'd been championing for months. She sounded genuinely happy about it, which was the hardest part, because Petra happy was one of my favorite things, always had been. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and did the thing I'd been avoiding. I pulled up Soren's social media, something I almost never did because we talked directly and neither of us were particularly interested in performing our lives online. His last post was 9 days ago, a photo of a building he was consulting on in Seattle. But Seattle was only a 3-hour drive from Portland, and his last post before that one, 12 days ago, was a shot of a restaurant interior. Warm lighting, exposed brick, a half-eaten dinner for one in the foreground. Artistic, unbothered. Captioned simply, "Good rooms deserve good evenings." I recognized the exposed brick. I'd walked past that restaurant a dozen times. It was in the Pearl District. I set my phone face down on the bed in Oslo and stared at the ceiling of a hotel room and listened to the specific silence of a realization that hasn't fully arrived yet but is already standing at the door. In my line of work, we call it pre-ring, the moment just before the frequency peaks. The room holds its breath, and then it doesn't.
There's a principle in acoustic science that most people find unsettling when they first hear it. Sound doesn't disappear. It gets absorbed, redirected, converted, but the energy doesn't vanish. Every room you've ever spoken in still holds a version of what was said there. Not literally, not in any way you could replay, but the surfaces remember the impact. The walls carry the shape of what hit them. I've always found that strangely comforting. That night in Oslo, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed with Soren's Instagram post burned into my memory, I found it less so. I didn't sleep much. What I did instead was think carefully about what I actually had versus what I was constructing. A mug I didn't recognize, a restaurant receipt from a Thursday Petra said she'd been eating at her desk, a photo of a restaurant interior posted by my closest friend taken at that same restaurant around that same period. None of it was proof. All of it was signal. I know the difference between noise and signal. Noise is random. Signal has a source. The next morning, I called my sister, Noah, before Brant arrived. Noah was 3 years older than me, lived in Bend, and had the particular quality of being able to hold difficult information without immediately trying to fix it. I'd always valued that about her. Most people hear a problem and reach for a solution before they've actually understood the shape of it. Noah listened first. I told her about the mug, the receipt, Soren's post. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been sitting on this?" "About a week," I said. "And what does your gut say?" I didn't answer right away. Outside the hotel window, Oslo was gray and still, the waterfront moving slowly in the early morning. My gut says I already know. I'm just trying to find out how much. Noah told me to be careful with what I did next. Not careful in the way people mean when they want you to do nothing. Careful in the way that meant move deliberately because this matters and you only get one approach. I spent that evening going through everything I could access remotely. Our shared calendar first. Petra kept a meticulous digital calendar, foundation events, personal appointments, our overlapping schedules color-coded in a system she'd built years ago and updated religiously. I'd always had access to that. She'd never thought to change that. I went back 4 months and read it the way I'd read an acoustic report, looking for gaps, inconsistencies, entries that didn't align with what I remembered being told. 3 Thursday evenings marked as foundation, late that I couldn't verify against any foundation event I could find publicly listed. A Saturday in December marked simply archive, the weekend I'd been in Tucson, and a notation that appeared 6 times across 4 months, always on days she'd mentioned being unavailable. S. Consult. S. I sat with that for a long time. S could mean anything. S could be a supplier, a
sponsor, a subcontractor she worked with regularly. S could be completely innocent and professionally boring, and I could be a man in an Oslo hotel room dismantling his own marriage over a calendar abbreviation. But I'd found the receipt, and I'd seen the photo, and I'd noticed the mug, and in 15 years of listening professionally to things that didn't quite fit, I had never once been wrong about Signal. I forwarded myself everything I could document. Then I opened a new email draft, addressed to nobody, and started writing down every date, every notation, every detail in the order I'd found them. Not because I knew what I was building yet, but because I'd learned a long time ago that clarity lives in the writing, not in the thinking. By the time Brant knocked on my door at 8 the next morning, I had 2 pages of notes, 4 hours of broken sleep, and a very specific feeling that I was about to find something I couldn't unfind. I put on my jacket, picked up my reference kit, and went to work.
I found out on a Wednesday, not through surveillance, not through a dramatic confrontation, not through anything cinematic or satisfying. I found out the way most people find out things they weren't supposed to know, through a small, ordinary mistake that someone made because they'd gotten too comfortable. Petra accidentally sent me a text that was meant for someone else. It came in at 6:47 in the evening, Portland time, which made it close to 3 in the morning for me. I was awake anyway. The message was short. It said, "Tomorrow still works. He's away until the 24th." She caught it within 40 seconds. I watched the typing indicator appear, then a second message arrived. "Sorry, wrong thread. Foundation scheduling. Ignore that." With a little emoji, a laughing face, like it was nothing. He's away until the 24th. I was away until the 24th. I put my phone on the nightstand and lay in the dark of that Oslo hotel room and felt something move through me that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite anything I had a clean word for. It was more like the moment in an assessment when you run a frequency sweep and the graph shows you exactly where the room is broken. Not surprising, exactly, but final. The data doesn't ask you your feelings about it, it just shows you what's there. I picked the phone back up and called Soren. Not because I was going to confront him, because I wanted to hear his voice while I already knew. I wanted to know what it sounded like, the version of him that had been sitting across from my wife in a Pearl District restaurant on Thursday nights, in my home drinking coffee from a Navy mug, existing inside my life like a load-bearing wall I'd never thought to question. He answered on the third ring. Easy, warm, exactly like himself. "Cal, you're up late. Oslo treating you badly?" "Venue's got good bones. How's the Seattle project?" "Wrapped up last week, actually. Back in Portland now." Back in Portland. Of course he was. We talked for 11 minutes. He asked about the shipyard acoustics. I told him about the reflection problem on the east wall, the same wall problem I realized as I said it that had started our friendship 6 years ago. He laughed at that. I laughed too. And the entire time I was listening to him like I listened to a room that's hiding something, tracking the resonance, feeling for the place where the sound went wrong. It was there, subtle, but there. A half-beat too casual, a slight overperformance of normalcy that I recognized because I was doing the same thing from my side of the call. We said goodnight. I put the phone down, and then I sat in the dark for a long time thinking about what it meant to lose 2 things at once. Because that's what this was. It wasn't just a marriage fracturing, it was a friendship I'd trusted without condition, without audit, without the careful skepticism I applied to everything else in my life. Soren had been the person I called when work went sideways, when my father got sick 3 years ago, when I didn't know how to be in a room with my own life. He'd shown up every time. Apparently he'd been showing up for Petra too, just not in any way I'd been told about. The particular cruelty of that, the specific shape of that betrayal was something I hadn't prepared for. You can brace for a marriage to break. People do it every day. But the friend-shaped hole that opens up alongside it doesn't come with any warning at all. It just appears, and you stand at the edge of it wondering how long it had been there before you looked down. I didn't call Noah that night. I didn't call anyone. I just started making a list of everything I needed to do before I got on a plane back to Portland. If you're feeling this one, stay with me. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. This story has a long way left to go, and I want to know who's in the room with me.
Here's what I've learned about emotional freefall. It has a ceiling. You drop, and it feels bottomless, and then at some point the floor appears and you land, and either you stay down or you get functional. I've never been good at staying down. It's not a virtue, it's just how I'm built. By Thursday morning, Oslo time, which was still Wednesday night for Petra, I had made the decision to come home early, 10 days early, and I had made it the way I make every significant professional decision, by removing emotion from the process long enough to see the structure clearly, then acting on what the structure told me. I booked a flight home without telling her, without telling anyone except Noah, who responded with 4 words, "Do you need me?" I told her not yet. She said she'd be ready. Then I called Wyatt Fenner. Wyatt was a divorce attorney in Portland. I'd gotten his name from a colleague 2 years earlier in a context I'd never expected to need it. He was direct, unhurried, and had the specific quality of making terrible conversations feel manageable without minimizing what was terrible about them. I appreciated that more than I could have anticipated. I laid it out for him, the mug, the receipt, the calendar notations, the text Petra had sent by mistake. He listened without interrupting, asked 3 precise questions when I finished, then told me what I needed to document, preserve, and avoid doing before I returned. "Don't confront anyone remotely," he said. "Don't change your behavior. Don't tip your hand." I told him I had no intention of doing any of those things. "Good," he said. "Come home. Let the situation exist as it is. Then we'll talk about what comes next." What comes next? As if there were an obvious sequence, as if ending a 6-year marriage and recalibrating a 9-year friendship were items on a project timeline with deliverables and sign-off dates. In a way, I suppose they were. I just never expected to be the one managing them. I kept up the routine with Petra meticulously, texted her good morning, asked about the foundation's acquisitions meeting she'd mentioned, sent her a photo of the Oslo waterfront at sunrise that she responded with a row of small heart emojis. She told me she missed me. I said I missed her too. She asked if I was eating properly. I was eating properly. I was also building a careful, documented account of a marriage that was operating on a frequency I hadn't been given access to, while maintaining a completely normal digital presence from a hotel room in Norway. The irony wasn't lost on me. She thought she was managing the story. She had no idea I'd already started reading the ending. I spent my last 2 days in Oslo finishing the assessment, not because I was indifferent to the work. I take every contract seriously, even when my personal life is collapsing quietly in another time zone, but because doing the work well was the only part of those 48 hours I had complete control over. So I controlled it. I mapped every frequency problem in that shipyard venue. I wrote a thorough preliminary report for Brandt. I shook his hand, told him the bones were genuinely exceptional, and meant it. He asked if I'd be back for the installation phase in spring. I told him I hoped so. And I did hope so, because hope, I was discovering, doesn't stop functioning just because everything around it is finding fire. It just gets quieter. It waits in the corner of the room until you're ready to hear it again. I packed my bags that night with the specific efficiency of someone who'd been traveling alone for 15 years and knew exactly what to keep close and what to check. Reference monitors, laptop, documentation, the receipt still folded in my jacket pocket. My flight left at 6:15 the next morning. Petra thought I'd be home on the 24th. She'd already made plans for the day before. She'd told me so herself, casually, in a text the previous week, that she had a full day and probably wouldn't be home until evening, and we could catch up properly when I landed the following day. A full day, the day I was actually arriving. I set my alarm for 4:30 a.m., turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark of that Oslo hotel room one last time, listening to the building settle around me. Old construction, thick walls, the kind of place that absorbed everything and gave nothing back. I understood that feeling completely. Before you go any further, if this story is hitting different, now's a good time to subscribe, because the moment I'm walking towards, it's not what you think is behind that door, and you'll want to be here for it.
There is a particular kind of invisibility that comes with arriving somewhere you're not expected. No one is performing for you. No one has adjusted the room. Everything is exactly as it was left, which is the most honest version of everything you're ever going to get. I landed in Portland at 9:18 in the morning on a Thursday, 10 days early. The sky was the specific gray that Portland does better than anywhere else. Not threatening, just present, like a ceiling that's decided to stay low and think things over. I collected my bag, cleared the terminal, and stood outside in the cold air for a moment, doing nothing. I had no intention of going straight home. Wyatt had been clear about that. Don't arrive reactive. Don't walk into a situation you haven't assessed. Know what you're walking into before you walk into it. So I checked into a hotel near the river, not because I needed to sleep, but because I needed a room that was mine, a door I could close, a place to set things down and think without the walls listening. I showered, I changed,
I ordered coffee from the lobby and sat at a small desk by the window and looked out at Portland moving through its Thursday morning like nothing unusual was happening anywhere inside it. I called Noah. "You're back," she said. Not a question. She'd been tracking my flight. "I'm back. How do you feel?" I thought about that honestly. Like someone who's about to do something they can't undo and has made peace with that. She was quiet for a moment. "Do you want me to come?" "Not yet," I said. "Maybe after. I'll be in the car the second you call." That was Noah. No performance, no unnecessary comfort, just the plain statement of being available. I'd spent 38 years taking that for granted. I made a note to stop doing that once this was over. I spent the morning doing what Wyatt had advised. I reviewed everything I'd documented. The calendar entries, the receipt, the text, my call logs, the notes I'd written in that Oslo hotel room. I organized it the way I'd organize an acoustic report. Chronologically, clearly, without editorial. Facts in the order they occurred. Evidence without interpretation, because interpretation was Wyatt's department. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I drove past the house, not to go in, just to look at it from the street the way a stranger would, the way someone who'd never lived there and had no idea what was happening inside it would see it. A well-maintained older home in northeast Portland. Good bones. High windows. A garden that Petra tended with the same careful attention she gave everything she loved. Soren's car wasn't there. Not yet. I drove back to the hotel and waited. At 11:47, I got a text from Petra. "Miss you. Foundation lunch running long. You'd hate everyone here." Then a small smile. I looked at that text for a long time, the easy intimacy of it, the assumption that I was 11 time zones away eating airport food and missing her back, the way she still knew exactly how to sound like herself. I typed back, "Sounds about right. Eat something good." She sent back a photo of a very average-looking salad. I set my phone down and put my jacket on. It was time to go home.
I want to tell you about the 2 minutes between when I parked down the street from my own house and when I reached the front door. Because everything I'd carried across an ocean, every careful calculation, every documented detail, every quiet decision made in hotel rooms and on early morning calls, all of it compressed into those 2 minutes in a way that felt less like walking and more like falling in a direction I'd chosen. Soren's car was in the driveway, a gray Volvo I'd ridden in dozens of times, parked next to Petra's car like it had every right to be there, which, from where it was sitting, I suppose it had come to believe it did. I stood at the end of the driveway for a moment, not hesitating, just acknowledging. There's a difference. Hesitation is when you don't know what to do. What I was doing was something closer to what I do before I enter a new venue for the first time, standing still long enough to let the space tell you something before you impose yourself on it. The house told me everything was exactly as I'd expected. I let myself in with my key. The entry hall smelled like Petra's candles, cedar and something faintly citrus, a scent I'd lived inside for 6 years and could identify in the dark. Shoes near the door, coats on the rack, a half-full water glass on the entry table that I didn't recognize. Everything quiet downstairs. Completely quiet. Which meant upstairs. I set my bag down by the door without letting it make a sound. I don't know why that mattered to me, some instinct about not announcing myself before I was ready to be announced. I moved to the base of the staircase and stood there for a moment, one hand on the newel post, looking up. Nothing dramatic happened, no cinematic surge of feeling, no internal monologue about justice or betrayal or the 7 stages of whatever I was supposed to be experiencing. I just stood in my own hallway and understood with the complete and ordinary clarity of a man who has finally run out of reasons to look away that my marriage had ended some time ago and today was just the paperwork. I went upstairs slowly. The guest room door was closed, a thin line of light underneath it. I stopped outside it. I could hear low conversation on the other side. Petra's voice, then Soren's, the easy back-and-forth register of 2 people who had been comfortable with each other for longer than I'd known. I had always loved that they got along. I want to say that again because it matters. I had considered it one of the good things, the fact that my wife and my closest friend existed in the same spaces without friction, without awkwardness, without me having to manage the distance between them. I had been proud of that, in the quiet way you're proud of things you think you built. I hadn't built it. I'd just been absent from it. I raised my hand, and I knocked 3 times. Not hard enough to be aggressive, but hard enough that there was absolutely no version of events in which either of them could pretend they hadn't heard it. The conversation stopped instantly. Then came the silence that isn't actually silence, the specific acoustic signature of two people freezing simultaneously, the held breath, the absence of all the small, unconscious sounds people make when they think no one is listening. I know that sound. I've measured it in rooms. It's the sound of a space contracting around something it wasn't designed to hold. Then movement. Quick and not particularly graceful, something that might have been a chair. A voice, Soren's, very low, saying something I didn't need to hear to understand. I waited. The door opened. Petra stood in the frame wearing a gray cardigan I recognized, her hair slightly undone from however it had started the day. She looked at me and went through something I can only describe as a full structural failure. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just the very quiet collapse of every load-bearing assumption she'd been living inside. Her face didn't cycle through expressions so much as it simply lost the architecture that had been holding them in place. She said my name, just my name, like a question that already knew its answer. Behind her, Soren was standing near the window. He was fully dressed, which I noted with particular feeling either way. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Not guilt exactly, more like the specific look of a man who has just understood that a version of himself he'd been protecting no longer has anywhere to go. For a moment, none of us said anything. Then I looked at Soren, my friend, the man I'd called from Oslo 11 days ago and laughed with about East Wall reflections, and I said, very calmly, "You should go." He didn't argue. He didn't offer anything. He picked up his jacket from the chair by the window, moved past Petra, past me, and down the stairs with the quiet efficiency of someone who knows that the only dignified exit available is a fast one. I heard the front door. I heard the Volvo start. I heard it back out of my driveway and move down the street until there was nothing left of it but the specific silence of an absence that used to be a presence. Then it was just Petra and me, standing in the guest room doorway of the home we'd bought together on a Thursday morning in Portland that she did not expect to go this way. And I reached into my jacket and took out the envelope.
I set the envelope on the dresser. Not dramatically, not with any particular force or gesture, just placed it on the wood surface between us and let it be what it was. Petra looked at it, then at me, then back at it, the way people look at things they recognize but are hoping they've misidentified. She hadn't misidentified it. "Callum, I'm going to need you to not do that yet," I said. She stopped. Something in my voice, maybe. Not anger, just the particular quality of a person who has already had every conversation they needed to have without you and has nothing left to rehearse. I told her about Wyatt. I told her that all communication would go through him from this point forward. I told her the house would go on the market and that she had until the end of the month to make arrangements. She stood there absorbing all of it with the stillness of someone in a strong current who has just realized that fighting it is going to cost more than letting it carry them. Her eyes filled but didn't spill. Petra had always had extraordinary composure when she needed it. I had always admired that. I admired it now in the cold, distant way you admire craftsmanship in something that has been used against you. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "It's been over for 8 months," she said. Not an excuse, not a defense, just a statement, offered quietly like she owed me at least that much honesty now that the cost of honesty had dropped to 0. Soren and me, it started 8 months ago and it's been over for 3 weeks. I looked at her. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said. "I kept thinking I'd find a way that didn't—" She stopped. There wasn't a way. I thought about that. 8 months. The calendar notations, the Thursday evenings, the weekend in December. 8 months of a thing that was apparently already over by the time I found a navy mug on my drying rack and started paying close attention. Which meant the mug wasn't recent. The mug was a remnant, a ghost object from something that had already ended, left behind in the specific careless way people leave things when they think the evidence no longer matters. I don't know if that made it better or worse. I'm still not sure it falls cleanly into either category. "Why is he still coming here?" I asked. She looked at the floor. "We were trying to figure out how to tell you, together, both of us." I absorbed that.
The image of the two of them in my guest room on a Thursday morning, working out the logistics of how to deliver news to me about themselves in my house while I was supposed to be in Oslo. The sheer administrative presumption of it was almost impressive. Almost. "Well," I said, "you don't have to figure that out anymore." I picked up my bag from the doorway. I'd repacked it at the hotel that morning with everything I needed: documents, drives, the things that mattered regardless of what address they lived at. Before I left, Petra asked me one question. She asked if I knew in Oslo. "I knew before Oslo," I said. She closed her eyes briefly. "The mug," she said. "The mug," I said. And there it was. The whole architecture of it, reduced to 2 words and a piece of crockery that didn't belong on my drying rack. 6 years of marriage, 9 years of knowing each other, a friendship I'd trusted without condition, all of it balanced at the end on the edge of a navy mug that someone forgot to put away. I need to pause here for a second, because what I found out next in the days that followed reframed everything I thought I understood about the timeline. If you've made it this far, don't go anywhere. Subscribe if you haven't, because the last chapter is where this story either lands or falls apart. Stay with me. I walked out of the guest room, down the stairs, and through the front door of a house I'd loved from the moment I saw it. Outside, Portland was still doing its low gray sky thing, unhurried, indifferent to the specifics of what had just happened on the second floor of one of its older homes. I stood on the front step for exactly 1 moment. Then I picked up my bag, walked to my car, and drove toward whatever came next.
Noah called it right. She said the hardest part wouldn't be the confrontation, it would be the Tuesday 3 weeks later when nothing was scheduled and nobody needed anything from me, and I had to decide, without the structure of crisis holding me upright, who I was actually going to be next. She was right. She usually is. It's deeply inconvenient. The house sold in 11 days. Wyatt handled everything with the same unhurried precision I'd come to rely on. Petra didn't contest anything. The division was clean, which I think surprised people who expected messiness. But when the evidence is thorough and both parties understand what it contains, there's very little runway left for theater. Soren and I never spoke again. Not because I couldn't find the words, I had plenty, but because some structural failures don't benefit from a post-mortem. You document the damage, you clear the site, and you don't rebuild on the same ground. The unexpected part, the thing I hadn't budgeted for emotionally, was the climbing gym. A colleague had mentioned it months earlier and I'd never followed up. 2 weeks after I left the house, I walked in mostly because I needed somewhere to put my body while my mind was still sorting through debris. The owner, a quiet woman named Rue, handed me a chalk bag without ceremony and pointed me toward the beginner wall without asking why I looked like I hadn't slept properly in a month. She could tell. She didn't make it a conversation. I went back the next day, and the day after that. Somewhere between the 3rd and 4th week, I stopped going because I needed to and started going because I wanted to. There's a significant difference between those two things, and I hadn't felt it in a while. Noah has been asking me to come to Bend. She has a spare room, a good coffee situation, and the particular quality of presence that makes hard questions feel answerable. There's also a venue out there, a new performance space with reportedly catastrophic acoustic problems that has been sitting in my inbox for 3 weeks waiting for a response. 2 options, both real, both asking something different from me. Stay in Portland and rebuild inside the bones of a life I already know, or drive east toward mountains and a sister who listens first and a room full of sound problems that are at least the honest kind, the kind that tell you exactly where they are and wait for you to fix them. I've been sitting with that question for 3 days now. Rue asked me yesterday what I was thinking about. I told her I was trying to figure out which direction to point myself. Rue chalked her hands, looked up at the wall, and said, "The route you scare you more is usually the one worth climbing." I'm starting to think she might be right. I haven't answered either way yet. I'm still deciding. And honestly, I'm curious what you would do. If you'd walked out of that house, driven away from that driveway, and found yourself holding 2 genuinely different versions of what comes next, which one would you choose? The familiar city with new footing, or the open road towards something that hasn't been built yet? Tell me below. I read more of those than you'd think. And if this story earned it, you know what to do.